On June 25, 1972, the first meeting of the Inner Circle of Advocates was convened in San Francisco, California, by its founder, Richard Grand. That first meeting included 11 of the best trial lawyers in the country to share information, professional techniques, and friendship. 36 years later, in January of 2008, Richard Grand spoke about his life, his practice, and the Inner Circle of Advocates.
A judge once described to others what Richard Grand is like. He said he comes into the courtroom with one nail, with one hammer. He puts the nail against the wall. He pounds it with the hammer, and once it's in, he puts the hammer down and he's done. Most people don't do that. I strictly am in the courtroom for one purpose: to communicate with the jury, not to communicate with anyone behind the railing. I do not allow family, people from the office, friends, enemies, etc., to come to the courtroom. You can meet me downstairs in the lobby where we have long lines for security, or even before security, and somebody would say, "You got anything going?" And I'd say, "No, my next trial is at Easter," even though I'm about to try a very important case upstairs. I am there for one reason, and that is to communicate with the jury, to listen to the jury. I work with butcher paper, now on pads, and grease pencils. I don't need PowerPoint. I don't need computers. The other side can use them every which way that they want. The jurors, at least in my community, are people like I am a person. I drive an '89 Ford. I live in the same house, Marcia and I. In 56 years, have only owned one house. I am not there for show. I will show you in a little while a jacket that I wear in court every day. I buy them 6 at a time. I don't want a jury to look at me. I want a jury to hear me. I am honest, and I hope the jury will feel that I'm honest. I was born February 20th, 1930, in the Free State of Danzig. The capital was Danzig. The country was Danzig, D-A-N-Z-I-G. It no longer exists after the Second World War. The Nazis captured it. This is where World War II started. It was called the Polish Corridor, and when the war ended, they gave it to Poland, the whole country, and it was called Gdansk. We left Danzig, I don't remember, I was 8 years old, either at the end of 1938 or the beginning of 39. And to put things in perspective, the war started September of 39 with Hitler going through Danzig, that's the Polish corridor, and invading Poland. We took a boat called the Batory to Southampton, to London, and on it studied a book called 1001 Words of English, as if there were only 1001 words of English. I was fluent in German, Polish, had some Russian, fluent in Yiddish, fluent in Hebrew, and had some French because of a variety of nannies that I had, but I had no English. From England, we stayed in London for a while, and from there we took a ship called the Aquitania, and we went to New York. We landed in New York February 17th, 1939, and on June 4th, 1951, I moved to Tucson because I had asthma. I must tell you about my first day in court and how the lack of education and language bothered me again. I got sworn on a Saturday, and all the deputies were out doing politicking door to door for County Attorney Castro. And the lawyer named Pete Ruby came up to me and said, "Here's the file, go over and try this case." Now, I'd never been in a courtroom, and there were two defendants, each represented by a lawyer who I knew, both the lawyers, because they graduated the year before I did. We all started together, but they did it in 3 years, and I did it in 4. And the judge said, "Hey, your name, sir?" I said, "Richard Grand." He said, "Mr. Grand, do you want to voir dire the panel?" And I turned to the two lawyers in the back, one of whom ended up Chief Justice of the Appellate Court, and I said, "What is voir dire and what is the panel?" And this lawyer said, "Stand up, Grand, and say you passed the panel," which I did. 2 days later, another deputy came by during electioneering and said, "Let me see your instructions." And of course, I said, "What are instructions?" So I want you to know I am more comfortable in the courtroom than I am any place else in the world. And the reason is that I tried 15 jury trials in that short period of time and lost 14 of them. So when you lose 14 out of 15 jury trials, you really get comfortable in a courtroom, and you get real comfortable with losing. So I started practicing in 58. Naturally, the new county attorney said, with his record, we're not keeping him. And I went into private practice January 2nd, 1959, doing anything I could do, particularly defending drunk driving cases, which in our justice court were jury trials. So you cannot imagine that I at times was trying 5 DWI jury cases, DWI meaning, drunk driving, in front of juries in the justice courts. Some of them lasted half a day. Some of them might have lasted a day. But you could try 5 or 6 out of them, and my fee was $35. So that was trying jury cases. For example, I can remember one week I got 6 1/4 and $9.75. And I mean $625 and $975 getting verdicts in whiplash cases. I never had a job with the firm, never had a mentor, never had a partner. Practiced by myself, and I'm now in my 2008, my 50th year of practice. I defended murder 1. A lady shot and killed her husband. There was no defense of insanity, no defense of irresistible impulse, no defense of self-defense, no defense of diminished responsibility. The jury could convict the first, which had an automatic death penalty, the best of my memory. This was 1962. Second degree or manslaughter. The client forbade in a recording from my telling the jury to convict her of second degree or manslaughter. And she got acquitted. Pretty good lawyering. In the days of $1 million verdict being a great deal of money, in 1971, I got the first $1 million verdict in Arizona, and in 1972, in a case called Dial v. Rye, W-R-Y, which is in the books, I got $3.5 million for the driver of a car who got rear-ended and $400,000 for the passenger. The defendant, who was a doctor practicing with the VA, didn't have much money, was not in the scope of his employment, for some reason had a $5 million policy. So the $3.9 million, the $3.5 million, was the largest in the United States, was upheld all the way through our Supreme Court. I dimly remember, but I may be wrong, that they tried to get cert to the U.S. Supreme Court, and every nickel was collected. I attended my first regional ATLA conference in Phoenix, and I heard Tom Lambert speak, and I was absolutely fascinated. Tom Lambert was the editor-in-chief of the ATLA Journal, which came out, I think, once a month. And anybody who got a good verdict wrote in, and it was published in the ATLA Journal. So Tom Lambert knew of every 7-figure verdict in the United States. Anyway, after going to that meeting in Phoenix of ATLA, I then attended my first ever national ATLA meeting, I think in Boston. And I heard Mo Levine, Craig Spangenberg, Leon Wolfstone, Francis Xavier, William Francis Xavier Gagan, Bill Colson, Craig Spangenberg, these people on the program, and it was fascinating. It was absolutely incredible. And I would try to speak to the Mo Levines and the Craig Spangenbergs after they spoke, to ask questions. I was full of questions, full of insecurities. And they were surrounded by other lawyers, and rather than asking questions, they all first had to make a joke, and so there was no real value. So I waited around rather than going back into the lecture hall. When they all left, I would talk to Mo Levine and talk to Francis Hare. And there was something about me, I think the word that best describes me is unique, but I had this passion, this thirst, this hunger to learn. And these people recognized it. And Mo Levine said, well, if you come to New York, give me a phone call, which I did. Went to court with Mo. Mo had a man who was called a medical prep man, and he'd prepare the doctor. And Mo's job was to go to court. I don't know if they had depositions in New York, they may not have, but he certainly didn't take depositions or do discovery. He'd get to the courtroom, at least the cases I went with him on, and people would be prepping him in the hallway. He'd meet the doctor in the hallway. I got to know Jack Fuchsberg real well. I went down to Florida to visit with Bill Colson. The guy who taught me the most was a guy named William Francis Xavier Gagan, who did both plaintiff and defense work in New York, who was invited to join the Inner Circle, and who said, no, this is too exclusive for me, and I don't want to do it. Marcia and I were on a tour bus, and the bus had to stop on the roads of Yosemite because two bears, quote unquote, were frolicking on the road itself, so they had to stop. And Marcia, to whom I've been married 56 years this month, and we've been keeping company since she was 17 and I was 21, we're now 77 and 74, said, you know, you really ought to take it easier and slow down. And I said, no, I'm going to go form my own bar organization. I got this sitting on the back of a Greyhound type bus. And I went back to the hotel and I took a yellow pad and I don't know why, I think my daughter maybe had a little compass, and I created this insignia with the 7 in it standing for a $7 million verdict. And I decided that each person would have to have tried 50 jury trials, which was no big deal back then, that they had to be personal injury jury trials, that the verdict had to be for compensatory damages, and that the name would be the Inner Circle of Advocates. After putting that on a yellow legal pad, I called up Picardo and I said, James, I've just created the legal organization and I want to invite you to become the first member, and it's going to be you and I, and then I'm going to call Bruce. And Picardo said, of course. And then I called Walk Up at Home that night, and we now had the 3 of us to start the organization. And that all was on May 24th, 1972, and we had our first meeting on June 25, 1972. I, in the meantime, flew to San Francisco twice, picked out a hotel at the Stanford Court, I picked out the menus, and I picked out a large round table that we would sit around, and that was the beginning of the round table. Simple. The sole purpose of the organization then and now is to exchange information on cases, no politicking. If you want to become the president, we're not going to make you the president. It's something we give to somebody who we hope doesn't have an agenda or carry on the principles of the Inner Circle. There's so many great people in this circle that you can't mention them all. But what's most important is getting the right members. And whereas I took anybody who had a 7-figure verdict, because we needed to have a nucleus. If we didn't have a bunch of members, this thing just would have scattered to the winds. So now we look at them, we ask questions, we call judges, we call other lawyers. When I got back to Tucson, I made several phone calls. I called Tom Lambert, told him what I'd done, and got a list of every single lawyer in the United States. And there weren't that many who had a 7-figure verdict. And Tom, through the ATLA directory, got me their phone number. I called Colson in Florida, called Fuchsberg in New York. I called Leon Wolfstone in Seattle, William Francis Xavier Gagan in Long Island. I, of course, asked Walkup whom he knew, asked Picardo who he knew, probably spoke to Phil Corboy, one of the great trial lawyers of America in Chicago. And, you know, I'm trying to think back 36 years, which is a long time. But I quickly got a list within one day, and I just put everything aside. I had the time. And I called every single person who had $1 million verdict. So anyway, at the first meeting, we had 11 people, and I must tell you, a good number of them were one-trick ponies and never got $1 million verdict again. I, by the way, very quickly in Tucson, Arizona, in a few short years, had 15 verdicts of $1 million or more. Maybe I was lucky, maybe I just got good cases, or maybe I can say at 78 I was pretty good at what I do. So the first meeting in the circle was pretty good. We did the round table, and you had great lawyers there, like Picardo, like Walkup, and some of which had had one verdict. And the first meeting led to a second meeting, which was also in San Francisco. The circle was really a very simple idea, and it's the simple ideas which I learned from Mo Levine and particularly Francis Hare. Creating the inner circle was easy. Keeping it true to its purposes, very, very, very difficult. And I am very concerned when I pass away, what's going to happen to the circle. We don't want people to have an agenda. We don't want people who get too much publicity, because we don't want them to use the inner circle as a merit badge. There are people who have agendas. To them, coming into the inner circle, not knowing the history of it, they think it's the International Academy, the Society of Barristers, the American College, Adler. We don't want people who must be on the program every time. We have high publicity members, certainly John Edwards, who did a marvelous job in Iowa yesterday, has been a member, I think, since 1990. We had Johnny Cochran, who unfortunately died 2 years ago from an inoperable brain tumor, who was a member. Sid McMath, who was governor of the state of Arkansas. Walkup was the opposite of Picardo. Very conservative. Everything was custom made, from his pajamas to his pants. Allegedly had one of the Harry Winston people, the jewelers, fly out to show some diamonds to Mrs. Walkup. And he didn't call up lawyers and say, "Can I get a copy of your argument?" Anytime Bruce read of a large verdict, he called up the courthouse or had somebody do it and bought the argument from the court reporter. Bruce had the arguments from every leading case that there was, and was clever. When we asked him what was the cleverest thing he ever did in the courtroom, was that he was trying a lawsuit and he made the mistake of eating something at lunch that he shouldn't have eaten, and he passed a lot of gas. He farted. And when he did, he turned to the defense lawyer in front of the jury and said, "Thank you," as if the defense lawyer had broken gas. Picardo once was staying in a hotel right across from Bruce's beautiful apartment up on Nob Hill, got Bruce on the telephone. He tried to wave to him, and Bruce said he couldn't see him. So Picardo stepped on a nice, beautiful table, and the table broke. And Picardo quickly propped the leg up under the table, called the front desk. I was with him, said he was dreadfully ill and he had to leave. Lawyers that were incredible. The guy I thought would run for the presidency was Bill Colson. Fuchsberg had one of the first private foundations in the United States. May have been $100 million in it back in the 70s. John Hoyt would stand up at our annual dinner, being somewhat short, stand up on a chair and tell some of the dirtiest jokes in the world and some of the funniest jokes. The brilliance of David Harney, Charlie Kramer, Charlie Leibson, Molovy never attended a meeting, by the way. Jerry Michaud, world-class bridge player, world-class poker player, and one of the most incredible trial lawyers anybody would ever see. One of the members always brought a mistress with him, who he introduced as his nurse. Talking about John Hoyt, by the way, I've got to show you something, things that you guys have not seen. He created a belt buckle for the inner circle. He had 50 of those made when I think the membership was 50 or maybe 100. And so people bought the belt buckle. We also, of course, had pins. And then I must tell you about two wonderful gifts that I got. This is a Patek Philippe wristwatch. And Ricardo in Walkup felt that for having founded the circle, that I should have this. And they took me to Tiffany's to pick out a watch. And this had a gold band on it. The watch itself was $1,700 without the band. And I said, you know, let's not spend too much of the Treasury's money. And so I got the watch, which is engraved on the back, May 4th, 1974. And it said, founder and first president, the Inner Circle of Advocates, to Richard Graham. And then later on, I bought my old gold band to put on it. And for our 25th anniversary, the organization gave me this wristwatch, which is called a Reverso. And on the back of it, it says, the Inner Circle of Advocates, 2 circles in the 7, founded 1972, Richard Grant. We now have a loose leaf notebook for the Inner Circle of Advocates. And I insisted that in the back we have deceased members. And there are 49 names in the back. And that came to me because Jim Ricardo very much said, I want to be remembered. So being in the back of the book, which will last as long as the Inner Circle lasts, our names, the 49 who died, my name and your names down the road will be listed there. When I do join our other 49 members up in heaven or wherever we end up, if I want to be remembered, and I do want to be remembered like all of us, it's not for the first $1 million verdict, it's not for the largest verdict in the United States, it's not for how many verdicts. I want to be remembered for having started the Inner Circle of Advocates. It's really unique. It took a tremendous amount of guts. People tried to get it disbanded. They said it was elitist. The $7 million verdict didn't make any sense. Why wasn't it 900,000? Why wasn't it 40-person injury jury trials? I made up the rules, and I stuck to the rules. And little by little, things have varied. Frankly, the round table's too big. There are too many guests there. There should be no guests at the round table. It should be members only. At my law school, the University of Arizona, I give the students every year thoughts for students, and which I hope will be helpful. So this one said, a lawyer must be bold, and that's what I was taught by one of my professors. My dad said, dream, no charge for alterations. Have any dream you want. Shakespeare said, the young soldier seeks the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. Lampert talked about the bitter bookkeeping of death. And the thoughts I give them are not transparent. They've got to think about them. They've got to have respect for judges. Judges can be trusted. They work hard and are underappreciated, and you too will be underappreciated. Pain is the window into hell. That may be one of Colson's. Anything less than full justice is injustice. I wish you could wave a magic wand. All simple phrases, things a jury could understand. Epitaphs. My epitaph many years ago was to have been, he ran all the way. I wanted to drop dead in the courtroom as the jury was walking in to give the verdict, but I would never hear the verdict. What a stupid wish to drop dead in the courtroom. But that's what I was for 30, 40 years. Now, I don't want to drop dead, but I certainly don't want to drop dead in the courtroom. A crisp sentence that wraps up a bailiff thought. You can never fool a jury. And these are things that I've given to the law students, and I think they're useful. I've not shared them with you because I thought you would think that they were too simple. I've told you my history. I'm still working because I made the mistake in life of not leading a balanced life. Work was my mainstay, and I never learned golf or sports, and except for going to theater and reading, there was not relaxation. There wasn't enough time devoted to other things and to family. As J.B. Spence, who has got to be one of the wisest people I've ever met, said, we're all addicts in the inner circle. We're addicted to one more verdict, and we're addicted to one more piece of publicity. Life is short. Tony Deal dropped dead at a meeting, a very young man. Our member from Louisiana died in the last 60 days and died at age 94. Ricardo made it to 92. Fred Josephus made it to 94. Some of them died quite ill, like John Holloway. Some of them died suddenly, like Dan Cullen. One of our members, maybe many years ago, when he had a problem with the bar, ended his own life, which was never finally proven one way or the other. But he always talked about with me about dignity in life and dignity in death. I love the circle, and I mean it isn't just saying it. I birthed it. It was my son. I watched it. I had terrible fights with other board members about it, fights with other members because I wouldn't let their sons into the meetings, and then I wouldn't let their sons into their organization. I fought for the circle, and I truly hope it doesn't make friends. But if the circle is important, if it has to continue to serve the purpose of having good educational serious meetings, good, serious exchange of information by top people. You've got to keep it different. Every year since 1972, I've written you an end-of-the-year letter, and I always end in the same way. We wish you good health and a long life for you and your family. And I know it sounds corny, but I'm a corny kind of a guy, and the Inner Circle is kind of a corny, unique kind of an organization. Big hug to all of you. I thank you for belonging to the circle. I thank you for sharing. I thank you for putting up with me, my criticisms, my inflexibility at times. And I ask you to please, please watch out for the circle when I'm gone. Treat it as if it's wrapped in cotton. It's fragile. It's like an eggshell. It's got to be the right thing or it wouldn't have lasted for 36 years. Treat it well, and it will treat you well. And although you may think it's corny, it's my belief. God bless all of you. And God bless me and my family.